your question, you answer mine.
It's actually not my job to answer your questions. Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion with you?
I've asked you two questions. Should Hamas stay in power and are they a terror group? You're refusing to answer either of them. That is very telling.
TalkTV, it's the only place where you get the truth.
You've done a book on poetry. Poetry and music for the many. I love poetry. We can agree on that.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is TalkTV.
I'm Douglas Murray on Uncensored. Tonight, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton and Professor Stephen Hawking are among the high-profile people named in bombshell documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein. But are we missing the most important figure in all of this? Jeffrey Epstein himself. We'll investigate. And do court cases and ballot bans only make Donald Trump's chances of winning the White House stronger? We'll look forward to the US presidential election that will shape the world. And from James Bond to Doctor Who, are trigger warnings and an obsession with inclusion and diversity ruining our most loved shows. Actor and comedian James Dreyfus will join me live.
Live from the News Building in London, this is Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Good evening and welcome to Uncensored, where it's my final night holding the fort for Piers. He's going to be back on air next week. However, if you're missing Mr. Morgan's hot takes on the really big topics, then he is still very active on social media. Here's one of his overnight posts. We're 3 days into the transfer window and Arsenal still haven't signed a striker or even made a move for one. What the hell are you waiting for, Arteta? Well, we're all thinking it, aren't we? Even if we're not saying it. Anyway, on to other matters. And there really is only one place to start this evening. Court files and documents containing previously hidden identities of people associated in some way with the late notorious sex offender Jeffrey Epstein are now unsealed, and the names revealed are a mix of the scandalous President Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, the surprising Professor Stephen Hawking, and the truly surreal David Copperfield, the magician. Now, the first thing that has to be said is that the inclusion of a name in the documents doesn't mean that that person is guilty of any illegality or indeed inappropriateness. But let's be honest, being on Jeffrey's secret list isn't something you'll be rushing to put in the hobbies and interests section of your CV. Overall, however, my take on this dark story is that even with the list now out in public, there are still more questions than answers. And the number one question for me is this. Who exactly was Jeffrey Epstein? Was he merely a very rich sex offender with a lot of famous friends who enjoyed taking a ride on his private aeroplane or visiting his luxury island? Or was there something else going on? One theory, which I myself have heard from trusted associates, is that Jeffrey Epstein was an invention, deliberately and carefully created by those who wanted to keep an eye, perhaps even a leash, on the rich and powerful. Here's a friend of mine, the physicist Eric Weinstein, talking to my guest from yesterday, Chris Williamson, about his meeting Jeffrey Epstein for the first time.
And my take on it instantly was, this is not an actual human. This is a construct of someone's. Someone has created a fake human being called Jeffrey Epstein, who's a mysterious currency trading financier with crazy rules so that no one would ever invest with him. And I think that was to keep people from seeking his investment services. I mean, he's labeled disgraced financier, but nobody has a record of trading with him.
And so the theory goes, Epstein was an asset created in order to trap powerful people in compromising positions, which could then be used in order to control them. The Russians call that compromat, and they are very good at it. Now, I don't know if this is even close to being true, but I will say this. In 2024, simply claiming something is a conspiracy theory doesn't necessarily make it false. Not anymore. And the more that comes out about Epstein, including still very mysterious circumstances surrounding his death in custody, means that I'm willing to at least consider alternative narratives other than the one being fed to us through official channels. Now, joining me now is the author and investigative journalist, Vicky Ward, the author of War Against the Jews, and Jeffrey Epstein's former lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, and the man I mentioned in my monologue, physicist and podcaster, Eric Weinstein. Thank you all so much for being with me tonight. First of all, Vicky Ward, if I may, you were commissioned to write an incredibly important article way back in 2003 about Jeffrey Epstein. It was called The Talented Mr. Epstein, and you've since said that there were significant efforts to sort of keep some of your revelations out. What exactly happened there?
Well, you know, what happened there was Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he was an extraordinary manipulator, not just of young, vulnerable women, but of rich, powerful men. And, you know, what happened in my reporting was that, you know, I still don't know all of the details, but I had the on-the-record allegations of two sisters, two women, and you know those allegations were cut from my story. And you know, Jeffrey Epstein had gone to great lengths to meet with then editor of Vanity Fair, and at the same time, you know, Jeffrey Epstein was a formidable person to write about. You know, he threatened me. I was pregnant with my children, and he told me that if he didn't like what I wrote, he would have a witch doctor place a curse on my unborn children. He told me he'd found out where I was giving birth. You know, I add, this didn't stop me from reporting the absolute best that I could, and I did debunk some of the claims he made about his own financial, professional life. But, you know, the whole thing was, Douglas, a nightmare.
Can I ask you also, Vicky, just quickly, were there any of the names that were released today which surprised you?
No, I didn't know about David Copperfield, and I don't think I'd read about Stephen Hawking. But no, they didn't surprise me. I mean, you know, I've been covering this story for over 2 decades. So I was very familiar with a lot of this. I mean, what it just did was solidify a picture by putting specific names in places. But I think that, unfortunately, the documents still don't show a different part of Jeffrey Epstein's life, which is the manipulation of the powerful people. It was a horrific portrait of this horrific sexual subculture in his homes, but it didn't explain why people like Bill Clinton and massive philanthropists like Leslie Wexner, why they wanted to be around this man. And I'm sure your other guests are going to have a lot of insight into that, because it wasn't because he had a whole group of underage women around him.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I just come next to Alan Dershowitz? Thank you so much, Professor Dershowitz, for being with us. First of all, of course, you were Epstein's lawyer at one point, and you were also named in these released documents today. How do you respond to this?
Well, first of all, the woman who accused me has now admitted that she may have confused me with someone else, may have been a case of mistaken identity, and she's dropped all of her legal charges. I first met Jeffrey Epstein. I was introduced to him by the Lady Rothschild. She asked me to meet him because he was a major contributor at Harvard. And I agreed to meet with him, and I went to some seminars that he conducted at Harvard, with the president of Harvard, with major academic figures. But from the day I met Jeffrey Epstein till the day he died, I have had sexual contact with one woman and one woman only, my wife. And so I was one of those who wanted these papers to be released. My disappointment is that only some have been released. I want everything to be released. because they will confirm the fact that I did nothing wrong. And they would also shed light on other people who have been accused, some truthfully, some falsely. But the key point is that we can't have just partial releases of material. In many of these cases, the accusation is there, but the rebuttal is not there, or the disproof is not there. So for the public to form a valid judgment, you need a full release. I don't need that, because in my case, the woman who accused me has admitted that she may have mistaken me for someone else, but I think others may very well need the full evidence to be exculpated and to prove. But some don't want it, because they may very well.
On that, just very quickly, I mean, President Clinton is mentioned more than 50 times in these documents, and he maintains he never visited Epstein's island. Donald Trump's also mentioned in there. But do you think politicians and others should explain their exact links with Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, for example, I'll give you a story. I was having dinner, this is a name-dropping story, with Caroline Kennedy, the former president's daughter, and her husband, and Bill Clinton, and another couple. And the phone rang. This was on Martha's Vineyard. And he was president. The Secret Service gave him the phone. He went away, walked for about 15 minutes, had a vibrant conversation. I didn't hear it. And then he came back with the phone and saying, Alan, somebody wants to say hello to you. And he handed me the phone. It was Jeffrey Epstein. So this was way before any accusations or anything was suggested about Epstein. But obviously, Clinton and Epstein had a friendship. And in most cases, in my example, my friendship totally terminated the day the accusations came out. I did serve as his lawyer, but never again socialized with him once I had heard these accusations. I think that's probably true of some people. In other cases, people continued to have a friendship with him even after he served his sentence in prison. And they do have some explaining to do, but that doesn't prove guilty. Just bad.
Let me bring in Eric Weinstein, who's been patiently waiting in LA. Eric, we heard earlier a bit of your description of Jeffrey Epstein. You met him once more than 20 years ago. Can you just quickly, briefly recap what your impression was?
Simply that he was introduced to me in a financial context. I was interested in investment in a so-called carry trade in foreign exchange. He didn't seem to have any interest in that. He said that he was a currency trader. There was no obvious evidence that he was a currency trader. He didn't speak like one. And he seemed to be very interested, as per the previous comment about Stephen Hawking, in my work on what might be called post-Einsteinian physics. In particular, if you check out his sponsorship of a conference that he held in the Virgin Islands called Confronting Gravity, he was very interested in science. This obviously is an area with potential military applications. He was a very strange person from beginning to end. I don't really believe
when you say that he was a strange person, I mean, describe some of the things that were odd in that first meeting, that one meeting you had.
Sure. I don't hear anyone mention the fact that he used an American flag as a tablecloth, making his dinner table look like both a coffin and a trap for you to stain the flag of your own country. He brought in a woman who I think he introduced as an heiress who was braless, that he bounced on his leg at a financial meeting in an attempt to create a distraction. The whole thing was completely surreal from beginning to end. I think one thing that you can learn about this is that he created an incredibly intriguing world. There was no hint. I think this was like 2003, 2004. So this is before he gets into trouble in Florida. And, you know, the whole thing was like a scene out of a movie, and you both wanted to be nowhere close and to know everything about it. And I walked out of there, called my wife and said, I just met a human being who does not appear to be a normal human being. He appears to be a construct. Somebody appears to have constructed something that looks like a financier, but if you scratch the surface, doesn't behave like one, doesn't seem to know a lot about science, although he's very interested in science. Nothing made any sense. Up was down, left was right, black was white.
Well, we're going to have to take a short break, but I want to keep all three of you here because I want to get back after the break into this really crucial question of who Jeffrey Epstein actually might have been. Who do we think he was? We'll be talking about that and much more after the break.
We're here!
Thanks for joining us.
You're with Talk TV, on radio, online.
We're on your smart speaker as well.
Criminals using XL bully dogs as weapons to threaten others.
No matter how well trained, most dog owners will tell you a dog can turn.
Do you know what I love about Talk Today? We do it all. Sunak, Suella, scones.
I rather like David Cameron. I don't sort of bear him any ill will because he delivered the referendum that he said he would deliver.
The Tories love a scrap. You can almost see this coming round the tracks with Suella Braverman. She's heading up one side and Rishi Sunak the other.
The police are pro-Palestine. That is just not right. You swear an oath in the police to act without fear or favour.
The COVID inquiry seems to have turned into a sort of pantomime. There's not really any substance to it.
It's hard to know whether it's a farce or a tragedy. The amount of time it's taken, the number of illegal migrants currently sent by us to Rwanda, zilch. The amount of money it's cost, what are we saying it's cost?
About 140 million.
140 million pounds so far. So 140 million pounds, so far result nil, absolutely nil.
Are we only going to be trusting sources like Meta and Google? Where is our unbiased news going to come from?
Calais in winter is cold.
That is from the Jeremy Corbyn book. Kevin O'Sullivan is the worst presenter on Talk TV, sitting on his fat arse talking for a living.
If you're walking towards me and you're a vegan, you should have a great big orange sticker over here saying, "Watch out, vegan's about."
The weirdest plank that we've had in, for 3 years? Hundreds and hundreds of mice in a box, which he walked into a branch of McDonald's. McMouseman.
McMouseman, yeah.
McMouseman.
He should be easy enough to catch, this guy, shouldn't he? I mean, he's got a house full of mice.
This is a major summit.
President Biden decided this was important after watching a Tom Cruise film.
Sunak and the current Conservative government are not conservative.
Why don't you leave that party and come to one that actually shares your ideology?
This has been a party political broadcast on behalf of the Reform UK Party.
Hi, Ofcom.
Kids think all they have to do is take pictures of everything.
Just shut down TikTok. Problem solved.
This is really unfair.
What's unfair?
If it's on camera, we're not doing the interview.
Yes, I'm going to do.
You're going to resign?
Yes, because I cannot continue my work. When I say I am God, I'm not joking.
Did you feel Elvis was controlling?
I've been answering your question, you answer mine.
It's actually not my job to answer your questions. Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational
discussion? You can't, can you? I've asked you two questions. Should Hamas stay in power and are they a terror group? You're refusing to answer either of them. That is very telling.
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
You've done a book on poetry. Poetry and music for the many. I love poetry. We can agree on that.
Welcome back to Uncensored. Still with me today are author and investigative journalist Vicky Ward, author of The War Against the Jews and Jeffrey Epstein's former defence lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and the physicist Eric Weinstein. Let me just very quickly, Eric, I just wanted to ask you quickly what you were saying before the break. What is the actual allegation you're making? Who do you think Jeffrey Epstein actually was?
I don't know. That's a great question. But I knew that he wasn't who he said he was almost from the instant I started speaking to him. If I had to make a guess, and you're calling for speculation, I would say that he really belonged to what is almost certainly the covert operations community, and that he did not appear to have a prime broker. Nobody seemed to have traded with him. Nobody seems to ask questions around him. So it's very suspicious that we don't, for example, ask for Form 13F. If he was a major hedge fund trader, it's almost impossible to move through the markets without leaving a wake. If you have to speculate, I would say that he probably belonged to covert operations for one or more nations, and that what we're looking at is a very strange, you can shake your head, Alan, but it's also the case that I don't necessarily believe that you stopped associating with him personally at the time of his conviction in Florida, because I think there are pictures of you at the program for evolutionary dynamics, socializing with Pinker, Trivers. I don't know. You tell me.
I'm going to have to go back to Alan Dershowitz on that. Alan Dershowitz, how do you respond?
All before that, no, he was not a member of any intelligence agencies. I'm quite sure of that. And he was not a hedge fund guy. In fact, once, you never want to tell humorous stories about Jeffrey Epstein, but he once said to me he wanted to sue a newspaper for defamation. And I said, why did they call you a pedophile? He said, no, they called me a hedge fund guy. He was very upset at being called a hedge fund guy. I don't know what his financial business was, but I can be relatively certain he was not an asset for the Mossad.
Can I just ask why, Alan Dershowitz, can I just ask why you're so certain about this? Because it does seem to have been an intelligence gathering operation of some kind, or a compromat situation, or a blackmail situation, something like that, surely.
It's possible, but I never saw any evidence of that. He was a guy from Brooklyn, grew up in Coney Island. He was very curious. He wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He didn't know as much about science as he thought he did. But I can tell you that people like Steven Pinker and people like Stephen Gould and people like the president of Harvard thought he asked good questions during the seminars that we all attended. Those seminars, I never attended a seminar after I represented him. My relationship did terminate. I continued to take his phone calls after that. Look, I don't know who Jeffrey Epstein is. He was very, very, I didn't even want to meet him initially, but Lady Rothschild insisted. And then some people at Harvard said they wanted me to put together some people to attend seminars of his. And I did that. And we learned a lot. I met people at Harvard that I had never known, even been on the faculty for 50 years, men and women.
Vicky Ward, let me just come back to Vicky Ward quickly. You've been waiting patiently, but I mean, a man who apparently boasted to associates that he had compromising material, film footage and others of important individuals. And that's not the normal way in which anyone behaves, is it?
Right, Douglas. So, I mean, one thing we did learn in the papers that came out last night is that, you know, he did, in some of the depositions, ask the women who claimed that they were sent out to men to give them very detailed descriptions of what had happened so that he could use it to blackmail them. I've never seen that spelled out quite so specifically before. And then to your point about, you know, the question, who was Jeffrey Epstein? Here's what we do know that is not speculative. He did know the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He did know Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of the United Arab Emirates. He did know very well Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel. That pictures of all of these men. There's a picture of him, I believe, with the Pope. There was a picture of him of all sorts of world leaders. And we know that even after he got out of jail in 2010, you know, he was clever enough to use the connections he had with the academics, with the former president of Harvard, with these other world leaders, to draw in other billionaires like Bill Gates. He understood how very rich, powerful people around the world connect with each other. He understood what very rich, powerful people want from each other. He understood how to connect the plutocracy and the elite. Does that mean he was an asset? I don't, you know, there is speculation, but it is, he certainly was a manipulator of the 0.001%.
Eric Weinstein, quickly, just coming back to you, if I may, quickly. I think a name that quite a lot of people have been rather surprised to see on this list for perhaps several reasons is the late Professor Stephen Hawking. What on earth are we meant to make of this?
Well, I mean, there's two separate things. One is that the state of physics is bizarre in that it's one of the most consequential things you could possibly study for military purposes. And at the same time, it has been sort of more or less run into the ground. So Stephen Hawking was of interest probably for the same reason that Jeffrey Epstein was much more interested in talking to me about post-Einsteinian gravity than he was in talking about carry trades. And what Professor Dershowitz says is very strange to me, because he advertised to me that he was a currency trader running a massive hedge fund out of the Villard House in New York on Madison Avenue. And I dropped off documents there. So something is really not gelling. And one of the really interesting things would be to have very extensive discussions to try to figure out who this person is, because the person who presented himself to me was much more like the person who presented himself to Vicky than the person who presented himself to Alan Dershowitz. Now, what I would say is that he had also extensive contacts, apparently, with the Harvard mathematics department, both through Benedict Gross and through Martin Nowak. Harvard is all through this story, and as we are learning, Harvard is a very strange place. I was there for about 20 years. It is sort of an extension of the US government in an unacknowledged capacity, and it has the only university to really have the power to effectively change the narrative of academics, in particular very consequential fields. Now, the other thing about Stephen Hawking that you should just know is you should probably do a search on the word San Bernardino and Stephen Hawking. It was not a secret that Professor Hawking had a very healthy appetite for life, and that this is not a new revelation, nor is the fact that he was associated with Jeffrey Epstein a new revelation. So that there's something very peculiar about the way in which we are forgetting a tremendous amount. I would also recommend looking up the name Craig Spence if the suggestion that this sounds like a completely insane idea that he was connected to intelligence. Craig Spence is the antecedent, apparently, of Jeffrey Epstein. It's just very strange that all these things made the papers. There's extensive documentation on the internet. We pretend that we don't know.
Let me just go quickly. Alan Dershowitz, I can see, wanted to come back in.
Well, of course he knew Stephen Hawking's. There are newspaper reports about Stephen Hawking's having come to a conference on his island where he had conferences. So far, not a single one of the names that have come out has surprised me. I had heard all of it before, but as the judge in the Second Circuit, Cabranes, once said, if there's an accusation made in court papers, it's to be less believed than an accusation made to the media. Because if the accusation is made to the media and it's false, you can sue for defamation. Whereas if the accusation is made in court papers, there's a privilege. And so the judge said, look skeptically at accusations made in court papers. Look, I want everything out. I want all the theories out there, all the documents. Let the public decide. There are people who don't want things. They have things to hide. But people like me who have nothing to hide, who are not in any way embarrassed about any of these revelations, because we know we did nothing wrong. We're the ones who want all these papers out, all these documents out, and I'm hoping the judge will now release everything, every single document.
Alan, I find that very interesting because
Go ahead, Eric, quickly.
Yeah, one of the things that I find very intriguing is that Jeffrey Epstein appeared to know all sorts of things about me that were not public and seemed to require almost a periscope into my life, in particular scientific things about me that probably flowed through the Harvard department that I was from which I took my PhD. I don't think that you're grasping how strong the circumstantial case is that this person was somehow attached to intelligence and may have benefited from things like state secret privilege and other forms of exotica in the law.
Let me finish with just asking a very quick but pretty important question of each of you, one by one, if you may, just very quickly. Of course, the other thing that makes the whole thing bizarre is the manner of his death. Did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself, Vicky?
I think that whatever happened, he had help. It didn't happen just by himself.
Alan Dershowitz?
I have the same view. I think he probably killed himself, probably paid off guards to close the TV and other things, but I don't exclude the possibility that there may have been third parties involved. I'm not sure. That's why I want to complete everything coming out. Enough speculation, enough inference. Let's get to the facts.
And Eric Weinstein?
If I had to speculate, I would say that I've never met a person less likely to terminate his own life from embarrassment than Jeffrey Epstein. I would put him first on the list of a person who would be undaunted by being worldwide known as a sex offender.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vicky Ward in New York, Alan Dershowitz in Delaware, and Eric Weinstein in LA. It's a great pleasure to have you all on. Thank you. Now, next on Uncensored. Could Donald Trump return to the White House? And could Sir Keir Starmer be the UK's next Prime Minister? We'll look ahead to a crucial year in politics.
We're here.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with TalkTV, on TV, on radio, online.
We're on your smart speaker as well.
You know what I love about Talk Today? We do it all. Sunak, Suella, scones. I rather like David Cameron. I don't sort of bear him any ill will because he delivered the referendum that he said he would deliver.
The Tories love a scrap. You can almost see this coming round the tracks with Suella Braverman. She's heading up one side and Rishi Sunak the other.
The police are pro-Palestine.
That is just not right. You swear an oath in the police to act without fear or favour.
The COVID inquiry seems to have turned into a sort of pantomime. There's not really any substance to it.
It's hard to know whether it's a farce or a tragedy.
There needs to be one human per machine to come and rectify beeps and the clanks and when it goes wrong.
Unexpected item in bagging area.
I know.
Are we only going to be trusting sources like Meta and Google? Where is our unbiased news going to come from?
Graham was president of the Cambridge Union, which is the rubbish version of being president of the Oxford Union.
Kevin O'Sullivan is the worst presenter on Talk TV, sitting on his fat arse talking for a living.
If you're walking towards me and you're a vegan, you should have a great big orange sticker over here saying, "Watch out, vegans about."
Twitter, you sons of Can you please reinstate my account?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a major summit.
President Biden decided this was important after watching a Tom Cruise film.
Kids think all they have to do is take pictures of everything.
Just shut down TikTok. Problem solved.
When I say I am God, I'm not joking.
Did you feel Elvis was controlling?
I've been answering your question, you answer mine.
It's actually not my job to answer your question. Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational
You can't,
discussion
can you?
with
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
This is Talk TV.
Welcome back to Uncensored with me, Douglas Murray. 2024 will be the biggest election year in history. More than 60 countries representing half the world's population are going to be going to the polls. Notably, both the US and UK will vote, shaping not just their own fate, but the world's too. As Trump's potential candidacy for 2024 looks ever more likely, the efforts to remove him from the ballots raise a critical question. Could these attempts inadvertently play into his favour, actually bolstering his appeal among supporters and contributing to a narrative that fuels his political resurgence? Well, joining me to discuss this from Florida is the political strategist and pollster Frank Luntz. Also, here in London, TalkTV's international editor Isabel Oakeshott, along with lawyer and writer Chris Dorr. Thanks so much for being with me, everyone. First of all, let me come to you, Frank Luntz. I think a lot of people watching might be surprised by the possibility that Donald Trump might be making a return to the White House this year, but it looks possible, yes?
It looks, not only does it look possible, but at this point, if the election were held today, it actually looks likely. Donald Trump has been gaining over the last 4 months. The more indictments, the higher his numbers climb. The more condemnation, the higher his numbers climb. And you try to throw him off the ballot, his favorability actually increases. There's a level of intensity, a level of commitment among his voters that does not exist for any other candidate. So I'd have to say at this point, Great Britain, get ready because Donald Trump may return.
And you think that if Trump does get the Republican nomination, I mean, he's still, if you add all the other candidates together, they still don't add up to the amount of approval among the base that Donald Trump has. So it seems like a dead cert unless he's somehow knocked out through legal reasons or something. But you're saying that you think that if it's Biden versus Trump, a replay wearying as it seems of 2020, you think that the current polls, Trump beats Biden?
At this point, based on where the economy is, based on foreign policy issues, based on what's happening in the Middle East. And by the way, I'm so glad to do this because, sir, you are a hero in America. They appreciate you. They're grateful for you speaking up. And I realize that this isn't quite what this segment is about, but I wanted to do it to thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your courage, for your conviction, for telling the truth. And that is what Trump's people think of Donald Trump. We can disagree with him, but make no mistake, his people believe that Donald Trump tells the truth. They believe it's a witch hunt. They believe he's a victim. They believe this is a persecution, and that's why they back him so strongly.
Well, thank you very much for that, Frank Luntz. I'll come back to you, but just with me in the studio, Isabel Oakeshott, if Donald Trump does become president again in 2024, what does that mean in Britain? Because this country's government doesn't seem prepared for it, and a Labour government certainly wouldn't be.
Well, it means a roller coaster ride. I mean, what it would hopefully mean is that the UK-US relations become a little bit more important again. I mean, Trump is an Anglophile. He loves this country. He loved the Queen. He's very pro the UK. Again, it might raise some hopes of a UK-US trade deal, which seems to have dissipated. So I think in theory it would be a good thing. But that said, if we have a Starmer government, you know, probably less so.
Well, I was going to say, coming to you, Chris Dorr, I mean, if Labour were to win the election this year, and all of the polls would seem to suggest that, if Trump was in the White House and Starmer's in number 10, what does a special relationship look like?
Well, I think the more important thing is it's frankly astonishing that anyone thinks that a dangerous sociopath and a proven and a habitual liar like Donald Trump would be a good thing for anyone, particularly someone who as it expresses himself in so many dangerous ways about world affairs, and particularly his affinity for Vladimir Putin and so forth. So I think it's
that is so exaggerated, the whole Putin thing. I mean, it's such an old and lazy trope as well. I'm sorry to bring up the whole, Trump's really pro-Russian. I mean, honestly, I mean, are we going to really replay this whole thing again?
Well, we're not replaying it because the fact of it is it's a truth which it's uncomfortable for people. But you're right, it's one of the many hundreds and hundreds of problems with Trump as a politician.
Actually, Chris, what you just said, I mean, there was a whole thing about the Russiagate conspiracy in the US, investigations and so on. It came up with a great big nothing burger. I mean, isn't part of the problem, whatever your views on it, I mean, that all the allegations, there are plenty of criticisms you can make of Donald Trump, but whenever you get into the kind of, Russian collusion sort of stuff, isn't that exactly the sort of thing that makes voters do what Frank Luntz is pointing to, which is they say, everyone's been lying about this guy. We don't believe anything that the media says. We don't believe anything the commentators say. We're just going to stick with him because he's our guy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what that says about the vacuum in our politics, not just in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, is really tragic, isn't it? That we have an octogenarian, or almost one, we have an octogenarian president, neither of whom really are fit to govern, remotely fit to govern anything, let alone the most powerful country in the world. Where are the young people? Where are the dynamic, inspirational leaders who can appeal to the whole of the population rather than just narrow partisan interests?
Well, I want to bring Frank Luntz back in on that because, Frank Luntz, if you've just been listening to that, we do have young leaders in the UK compared to America. Not everyone in UK politics has to be an octogenarian. But would you say that the youth that is on Rishi Sunak's side and slightly on Keir Starmer's side as well, do you think it's an electoral advantage for either of them?
I don't think it gives an advantage, but most certainly if you're as old as Joe Biden and have trouble completing sentences and doing press conferences and all the things that we expect of a presidential candidate, I've heard that the strategy, you can see him moving off that plane very quickly. That's not what he does in most of the appearances. People watch him and they think, thank you, sir, for your governance. Thank you for putting America back on the right track, but it's time for you to go.
But if he does go, Frank, isn't the problem that, the Republicans have quite a bit of talent actually underneath Donald Trump, in my view. There's a lot of experienced governors and others. It seems that underneath Joe Biden in the Democratic Party, there's very little. I mean, they're not going to run Kamala Harris, are they? I mean, she's got roughly the same approval ratings as the Ebola virus.
Yes, that's a very good line. She's the least popular vice president since Dan Quayle, and he was the least popular vice president since Aaron Burr. You're correct. She is not going to be, by the way, that's how I can tell if anybody watched the play Hamilton. She is not going to be the nominee. But there is Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey. There's
Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom. These are people from the next generation. Any of these candidates would run better against Donald Trump than Joe Biden. So we have to wonder, why don't they give someone else who's younger the chance?
Well, the truth of it is ego, I'm afraid, and the hunger for power at all costs on the part of President Biden, which is utterly tragic for the American people, but sadly is likely to lead to an inevitable consequence.
Well, talking of a desire for power at all costs, Isabel Oakeshott, the Conservative Party is still said to be plotting against Rishi Sunak, all sorts of internal embroilings going on. Is the Conservative Party ever going to pull itself together and survive the next election?
I thought what you were going to say is holding on to power at all costs by pushing the election out as far as they can humanly
we know that
make it
today,
go. And this was quite a significant intervention. It didn't strike me as games playing. You know, he very naturally said, look, my working assumption is second half of this year. I think most of us have really thought that's when it would be. He still, of course, has it in his gift to suddenly say in a few weeks' time, if something extraordinary happens and suddenly fortunes look better for the Conservatives, he could suddenly say, actually, I'm going to go to the country in May.
And just quickly, reform, do they chip away at the Conservative vote?
I think the important thing is that they will also chip away at Labour's vote, and quite significantly, if Labour don't start saying something much tougher on immigration, that's going to be a real problem for them.
Quick lightning round. Frank Luntz, you think that Donald Trump's most likely to be president in the United States this time next year?
And a 51-49 advantage? Yes.
And who would you bet on as the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
I bet that Labour wins by a reasonably significant margin.
Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on. I think, tragically, we have a void in our politics of really powerful, inspirational political leaders with policies that have broad appeal and actually would make a difference in our society. And
so
that means we're left with the dross, basically, on both sides of the Atlantic.
Did you just describe Keir Starmer as dross?
No, not personally, but the Labour Party
just
as a
wanted
whole,
to check there.
Labour's not an inspirational party. I don't think they're really getting people on fire in this country. And until that happens, as it did, of course, with Tony Blair in '97, we're not going to see that kind of movement that makes for real change and real power in the hands of a government that can make.
Do you agree?
I want to see a hung parliament so that the people of this country get proportional representation. People are too disenfranchised.
No, I agree.
Proportional representation.
Yeah, there's a move in the country for it, I tell it.
Yeah, the coalition government.
I tell you what happens with proportional representation is you get Italy.
No, you don't.
But anyway, we can come back to that another night. Thank you all for being with me, and thank you to Frank Luntz over there in the US. Now, up next on Uncensored, trigger warnings and storylines dominated by identity politics. Is the diversity and inclusion agenda ruining TV and film? I'm going to be joined by Notting Hill, Gimme, Gimme, Gimme and the Thin Blue Line star, the great actor James Dreyfus.
We're here!
Thanks for joining us.
You're with TalkTV, on TV, on radio, online.
We're on your smart speaker as well.
Criminals using XL bully dogs as weapons to threaten others.
No matter how well trained, most dog owners will tell you a dog can turn.
Do you know what I love about Talk Today? We do it all. Sunak, Suella, scones.
I rather like David Cameron. I don't sort of bear him any ill will because he delivered the referendum that he said he would deliver.
The Tories love a scrap. You can almost see this coming round the tracks with Suella Braverman. She's heading up one side and Rishi Sunak the other.
The police are pro-Palestine.
That is just not right. You swear an oath in the police to act without fear or favour.
The COVID inquiry seems to have turned into a sort of pantomime. There's not really any substance to it.
It's hard to know whether it's a farce or a tragedy.
The amount of time it's taken, the number of illegal migrants currently sent by us to Rwanda, zilch. The amount of money it's cost, what are we saying it's cost?
About 140 million.
140 million pounds so far. So 140 million pounds, so far result nil, absolutely nil.
Are we only going to be trusting sources like Meta and Google? Where is our unbiased news going to come from?
Calais in winter is cold.
That is from the Jeremy Corbyn book.
Kevin O'Sullivan is the worst presenter on Talk TV, sitting on his fat arse talking for a living.
If you're walking towards me and you're a vegan, you should have a great big orange sticker over here saying, "Watch out, vegan's about."
The
weirdest plank that we've had in, 3 years? Hundreds and hundreds of mice in a box, which he walked into a branch of McDonald's. McMouseman.
McMouseman, yeah.
McMouseman.
He should be easy enough to catch, this guy, shouldn't he? I mean, he's got a house full of mice.
This is a major summit.
President Biden decided this was important after watching a Tom Cruise film.
Sunak and the current Conservative government are not Conservative.
Why don't you leave that party and come to one that actually shares your ideologies?
This has been a party political broadcast on behalf of the Reform UK Party.
Hi, Ofcom.
Kids think all they have to do is take pictures of everything.
Just shut down TikTok. Problem solved.
This is really unfair.
What's unfair?
If it's on camera, we're not doing interviews.
Yes, I'm going to do.
You're going to resign?
Yes, because I cannot continue my work. When I say I am God, I'm not joking.
Did you feel Elvis was controlling?
I've been answering your question, you answer mine.
It's actually not my job to answer your questions. Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational
discussion? You can't, can you? I've asked you two questions. Should Hamas stay in power and are they a terror group? You're refusing to answer either of them. That is very telling.
TalkTV, it's the only place where you get the truth.
You've done a book on poetry. Poetry and music for the many. I love poetry. We can agree on that.
This is TalkTV.
On the show tonight, she's the woman that organised an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell that we showed here on TalkTV earlier this year. She's closer to the Epstein story than almost anyone, and we're going to be getting some very interesting info from her. Also, why on earth are the police in London investigating war crimes in Israel? It's all coming up at 9.
Welcome back to Uncensored. The British Film Institute has issued the early films in the James Bond series with trigger warnings. And it's not for 007's Golden Gun, but because they could cause offence today. And it's not just James Bond that's been shaken, if not a bit stirred, with woke controversy. The new Doctor Who was introduced to us at Christmas, shaking his thing in a fetching muscle top and skirt, whilst Star Wars announced that their next film will be directed by a feminist who says she enjoys making men feel uncomfortable. It does really seem like South Park hit the nail on the head with this recent skit.
Put another gay diverse woman in it, make it more lame. No, what's going on with my stars? No technicality. Is there a problem, people?
We were just discussing ideas of what to do with the new Prince Eric movie.
Put a chick in it, make her gay.
Maybe we should go a different route than we did with Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, put a chick in it and make her lame and gay.
So, is this really the future of what we'll be watching in 2024? Joining me now to discuss this is the actor James Dreyfus. James, thank you so much for being with me.
Mr. Murray, we meet at last.
We meet at last.
Yeah.
Tell me, this. I mean, let's start with James Bond. Does it surprise you that James Bond now needs a trigger warning?
No, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest, to be honest with you. I mean, I've just read their statement about it, which is, whilst we have a responsibility to preserve films as close to their contemporaneous accuracy as possible, we also have a responsibility in how we present them to our audiences. Well, no, you don't.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I don't know what it means. I mean, back in the day, we had UAAX, all seemed pretty clear. And the Bond movies, I seem to remember, were, okay, they're not aimed at children like Doctor Who is, but the James Bond movies were teenage fare. I can't even begin to think why any of them have a trigger warning, least of all for John Barry's music.
You know, one of the things that amazed me about this, James, I always sort of think we seem to be run by cultural juveniles. I'm just trying to think back on the BFI released movies that I've seen in the past. I remember about 25 years ago, they released all of the great works of directors like Eisenstein, Pier Paolo Pasolini. I saw Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salò. I wouldn't recommend it to viewers any more than I would recommend some of the things that Eric Weinstein was recommending you look up in relation to Stephen Hawking earlier. But Salò is probably the most disgusting film I've ever seen, and it's based on the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom. Now, if they're going to start putting trigger warnings on James Bond, I reckon the 120 Days of Sodom probably needs some other kind of extreme warning.
Well, you know something, Douglas? I get nervous when I now see films without a trigger warning, because I think, oh my God, you know, what's in this? I mean, I was watching a film this morning. I love watching horror films. I'll give you an example. And there was a warning at the start of this movie, which was given by the directors, actually saying, we're warning you that some shots in this film will contain something that'll upset you in the name of humanity. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll steel myself a little bit. And the first image I saw was a baby seal being clubbed to death in real life. And so I immediately turned it off, and I thought, oh my God, and it's disturbed me all day. That I can understand. Epilepsy warnings, I can understand. But when you're talking about things like James Bond or even cartoons, I mean, if you really want to go back, put a disclaimer in front of Bambi, Watership Down. Those are the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. I don't understand it, but it gives me a clue here when they say, we listen to customer feedback and also continue to work closely with blah, blah, blah. Now, that tells me that they're listening to all the people that complain. Not the people that are happy, because they'll never call them up and say, yeah.
Well, now, that brings me on to Doctor Who, because you've been involved in Doctor Who, and Doctor Who in recent years really has been following the advice of Eric Cartman in that clip, and they've been putting a chick in everything and making it lame and as gay as possible, and not in a good way. What has happened to it, and what was your own experience with Doctor Who?
Well, I had no experience of Doctor Who until I was asked to play the Master by Big Finish, and I signed a letter asking Stonewall for a debate and defending J.K. Rowling from having death threats. And I thought everyone else in the world would sign it, but apparently not. And apparently then a petition was sent to this organisation, and I was ceremoniously dumped, but I wasn't even told. So I've heard nothing from them.
So you weren't in Doctor Who because you supported J.K. Rowling?
They erased me from, I found out because they'd erased me from the front of the CDs. They did a show called Masterful, which had a compilation of all the masters that had been played on audio and thing. And I was left out of that. And all they did was put out this rather ambiguous message that transphobia will not be tolerated in any shape or form, which basically said, we believe you are a transphobe. And
why are they even in this business, James? I mean, let me just play you a quick clip. This is something from the new Doctor Who. I can't understand how anyone thinks this is entertainment. Let's roll this.
Yes, the Meep. I promise I can help him get home and then you'll never see me again.
You're assuming he as a pronoun.
True. Yes, sorry, good point. Are you he or she or they?
My chosen pronoun is the definite article. I am always the Meep.
This is instruction, not entertainment.
Well, of course it is. I mean, I've always said, you know, that this pronoun business is not a question; it's a test. It's a test, and it's now become sort of part of regular daily life. I mean, the fact of the matter is still, you know, the vast majority of people don't understand all this. Children don't understand it. I've had members of my family, you know, younger members, completely confused by this stuff, and I don't really understand what's it got to do with it seems like it's no longer just entertainment. It always has to have some sort of message, and the message is quite niche.
Yes, As niche as possible, it seems, and as unamusing as possible, and as bland as possible, and as predictable as possible. It's like seeing an entire culture is just sort of made to be exactly the same across the board.
Yeah, that's how it seems to me. But the only positive I can see out of this, Douglas, is that eventually, this mask will slip. This niche will be burrowed into so deeply that people cannot ignore it any longer. So I'm hoping that this is a circle that will eventually end, and we'll just get back to entertaining people. I mean, Doctor Who is for children, and it surprises me that they slip this in, because it's obviously nothing to do with Doctor Who. It's to do with this ideology that's happening at the moment.
And very quickly, James Dreyfus, how come it seems now that everyone's saying you've got to be gay to play a gay character, you've got to be trans to play a trans character, but yet your former co-star from Notting Hill, Hugh Grant, is allowed to play an Oompa Loompa without actually himself being an Oompa Loompa? What's the explanation for that?
Well, it's extraordinary. It's I don't know how he got the part, not being an Oompa Loompa. That's the one. What I don't understand is you have people like Peter Dinklage saying, "Look, we've grown out of this Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs of us living in a cave or whatever," which denies work then to little people actors. We're talking about one person. The last Willy Wonka film had the same person reproduced over and over and over again. I think this is something that's, everyone wants to be. This is what happens when you have identity politics in the arts. Is everyone wants to be a piece of it.
Exactly.
When I see
so
a
much.
gay person,
Thanks so much for that. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. That's it from me, and it's been a great pleasure being with you all of this week. Sadly, Piers is back on Monday. Until then, whatever you're up to, make sure it's uncensored. Good night.
We're here!
Thanks for joining us.
You're with TalkTV, on TV,
on radio,
online.
We're on your smart speaker as well.
They have made a statement condemning Hamas.
We expect to see The Crown revisit Harry's anti-Semitic Halloween costume.
Criminals using XL bully dogs as weapons to threaten others.
No matter how well trained, most dog owners will tell you a dog can turn.
Do you know what I love about Talk Today? We do it all. Sunak, Suella, scones.
I rather like David Cameron. I don't sort of bear him any ill will because he delivered the referendum that he said he would deliver.
The Israelis are very conciliatory. All they want is to be recognised.
The timing of this Hamas attack comes because there was the expectation there was going to be a deal done sort of normalising relations with Saudi Arabia.
The Tories love a scrap. You can almost see this coming round the tracks with Suella Braverman. She's heading up one side and Rishi Sunak the other. Reshuffles usually very dull. This one had booster rockets attached to it.
Certainly the tone has shifted in terms of what Rishi Sunak has done. The question now is what he does next.
The police are pro-Palestine.
That is just not right. You swear an oath in the police to act without fear or favour.
The COVID inquiry seems to have turned into a sort of pantomime. There's not really any substance to it.
It's hard to know whether it's a farce or a tragedy.
TalkTV has spoken exclusively to a member of the Blade Runners.
Do you have a message for Sadiq Khan?
We're not stopping until you stop.
The amount of time it's taken, the number of illegal migrants currently sent by us to Rwanda, zilch. The amount of money it's cost, what are we saying it's cost?
About 140 million.
140 million pounds so far. So 140 million pounds, so far result nil, absolutely nil.
Are we only going to be trusting sources like Meta and Google? Where is our unbiased news going to come from?
Calais in winter is cold.
That is from the Jeremy Corbyn book. Kevin O'Sullivan is the worst presenter on TalkTV, sitting on his fat arse talking for a living.
If you're walking towards me and you're a vegan, you should have a great big orange sticker over here saying, "Watch out, vegan's about."
The weirdest plank that we've had in 3 years. Hundreds and hundreds of mice in a box, which he walked into a branch of McDonald's. McMouseman.
McMouseman, yeah.
McMouseman.
He should be easy enough to catch, this guy, shouldn't he? I mean, he's got a house full of mice.
This is a major summit.
President Biden decided this was important.